Welcome to the Japanese Bar. This is part 2 of an interview with sake brewer Andrew Russell. He discusses the daily and seasonal routine in a brewery. Plus, he provides tips on landing a brewing job as a foreigner. You gave everybody a little snapshot of like how difficult it could be at a brewery. I mean, you want to talk about your kind of your daily routine at a brewery?
Well, just because it's the night before a day of work, what I'll do is because it's already going through my mind. You kind of have to pre-plan the day before, so you know what to do. Because once you get into the brewery, there's not really much time to do much. But we're still we're not in top gear yet. We just started brewing, but as of tomorrow, that's going to change. Right now, we have 3 yeast starters, and one of them is graduating to its biggest tank, its
Cool.
its final tank. So tomorrow, and to give you a little idea about, there's so many ways you can brew sake, and it depends who you speak to, which is the best way, and everyone's got a best method. I think it really depends on the brewer. But we've got a very early start tomorrow because we're kind of making things hard on ourselves to benefit the sake. Our first job tomorrow is moving a tank of sake that is in its odori stage right now, or the dance as they call it. We're moving that into a full-size tank. Now, some brewers, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but some brewers from a moto stage, the yeast starter goes to a very, very small tank. What they'll do is when that moto is ready to get sandan jikomi, or 3-stage mashing, they'll put it directly into a large tank, and
Okay, kind of
they
build it up in one place.
yeah, and it has what they call the odori in that large tank. There's actually a technical term for it called suppon jikomi. It means you just move it directly in. But these large tanks with a very small amount of liquid means that the yeast starter cools down, and you can't really temperature control it. And it's at a very, very formative stage in its life when you do that. So what we do instead is each batch of sake goes to 3 different tanks. So from a moto tank, it goes into a medium-sized tank, and we can wheel that thing around to cooler parts of the brewery. We can, it's in a tank appropriate to its size, so we can control the temperature of it. And bear in mind, we're doing mostly ginjo production. And then we don't allow it to dance. So we're very strict at our brewery, is what I always say. Our toji always says odori sasenai. So we don't let our moromi dance. We put them into a bigger tank, and then the day that we mash it, we move it into the larger tank. And it's actually very physical work. We do it all by hand so we can avoid pumps. So we start at 5:30 tomorrow. And that is the first job of the day, and we're right up against it on the clock on that one, because we already start the boiler for the steamed rice. So the boiler will start at about 6 o'clock. Imada-san, our toji, will start that, and we'll have already started work that's going to take about an hour at 5:30. So at 6:30 we'll hopefully be just finishing that job, because bear in mind the steamed rice is going in that tank, so there's no room for error on any of this. It all has to fall into place. And then the other staff will start turning up towards 7, and that's what they call mushiagari. So that's when we'll start mashing. So we've got koji tomorrow to make. We've got to mash this tank, so it's going to be there's soe, odori, naka, and tome. We're at naka stage tomorrow. And then then we have to prepare the yabuta, because we haven't built it all up yet. It all gets packed away in the summer. And now we're about, probably now that we've reached the stage where we have moromi, we're probably about 3 weeks away from pressing, because it isn't ginjo we're making. So maybe 3-4 weeks. So we have to start building up the yabuta. And that will be our day tomorrow. So yeah, it's a busy one. So
I was imagining that would just kind of be stay in place somewhere somewhere in the brewery. Wouldn't think that would be disassembled and reassembled and all that.
Yeah, you have to build up a brewery every year. You have to dismantle as much as you can. Tools get put away, of which there's thousands of components, obviously. But the Yabuta, the large accordion-like press, that's a big one. So it's not a particularly complicated machine, but there's a lot of parts to it. So and it has to be immaculate. You have to wash every bag for the moromi is going into, because once sake gets to that pressing stage, it's really a battle to get any kind of outside odors away from it, because it really kind of shows up in the final sake. So
Yeah.
the first press each year is always very hard work.
Interesting. And so,
But
I
but
mean,
yeah,
how
it,
do,
it varies from day to day. So that's just tomorrow. So
yeah, so yeah, exactly. It'll kind of progress as the season goes along, or at least as you're progressing from, these kind of entry level grades to higher level grades and things like that. Um, I mean, so yeah, you want to get into that a little bit, because I mean, it's kind of a dynamic season, right? I mean, you start off doing some things, and maybe you hit your flow and you repeat a lot of those tasks, I'm assuming, over the course of a season. But I'm sure a lot of that changes as well. So I mean, what's kind of the season of a sake brewer? I mean, traditionally you're kicking things off around, October. When are you wrapping things up, and kind of what's that flow look like for you?
yeah, so like as I said, at the moment we're kind of just starting to reach top gear. We started brewing. If you consider the first steaming, the start of the brewing season, I don't. I consider the prep, because the prep is a lot of hard
Mm.
work. Like I said, you have to basically the brewery has to be put back together, but every single component needs to be cleaned. You have to, jet wash floors. You have to wipe down walls. You have to clean every little component of machinery. You have to re-strip things down again. All tanks have to get cleaned. So I always associate the start of the season is then, and one of the toughest times is then, because your body's kind of still not used to it. From the summer, you kind of get a bit lethargic in the summer, and then all of a sudden you're back. Your body's getting twisted into
Yeah.
bad positions and things inside machinery. So that's the first stage. Right now, we're starting to build up a head of steam. As I say, we'll have our first moromi, or real tank of sake, tomorrow. The next stage after that is you start obviously building up these tanks of sake, and when it really starts getting tough is when you start pressing. Like I said, that's a big job in itself. Because the yabuta, I keep saying yabuta for people that don't know what that is. It's the manufacturer who makes the vast majority of the pressing machines in a brewery. Once that stage starts happening, there's a lot of work gets done behind the scenes that people tend not to take much interest in, but actually, can be the most tiring. So bottling, pasteurization, these type of things. We at Fukucho, we have a very specific production technique where, or style, I suppose. Once we've pressed, almost immediately it's put into bottles, and that's difficult to do in season because it takes a long time. But the reason we do that is our toji very much believes in keeping freshness. So the idea is that they lock in that freshness, and when you're doing things in bottles, typically it's very gentle on the liquid inside. So when you do pasteurization, we do 100% pasteurization is in bottle. Very time consuming way to do it. But we think it's the best way to do it. So that's why we do it. But yeah, that's another kind of, significant point in the brewery when you start getting bottling and pasteurization. Where it starts getting difficult for me, and most brewers agree, is February. February is considered one of the hardest months, and there's a very, very good reason for that. You're too far away from the finish line to kind of get excited. but you've already been brewing at that point for several months.
Mm.
It's grim, it's freezing cold, it's the coldest time in Japan. um, I don't know what it is. It's dark as well. You know, you're getting up in the
Yeah,
pitch
yeah.
black, going to work, freezing cold, and then you come home and it's already dark. You're exhausted because you've been doing this, you know, this brutal scale. You probably, I mean, by this point, I'll have maybe had 3 days off. You know, that's, you know, there's no weekends. Weekends and weekdays mean nothing. So you may be lucky if you've had 3 days off, maybe once a month, and you get a couple of days off at New Year if you're lucky. So yeah, that's the grim point for me. I hate February, but then March kicks in, and you can start to go, okay, one more month, and we'll start finishing mashing shikomi. Once you finish mashing, there's still a ton of work to do, but it just eases the pressure
Yeah,
because you don't have that, you know, that constant thing that you have to do first thing in the morning, washing rice, steaming rice, getting it all put together, making koji, doing all the cleaning up that's associated with that. What you're doing at that point is you're managing the tanks that are still left.
yeah.
You're starting to think about maybe packing up the koji room. You know, you can start to do that quite early. You're doing bottling, of course, frantically bottling and pasteurizing, but you know that there's no new stuff, you know, being made. There's just the stuff that's in the tank, so you can start to count down the tanks. And yeah, then you get to April, and the idea for virtually everyone is to try and get finished before the Golden Week Japanese holiday, which is basically, depending on the year, the last few days in April or the beginning of May. And then, yeah, that's when you just sort of go, right, okay, they actually call it kaizo. It's the point where all tanks are pressed and bottled. That's the point where they call it kaizo. It just means you're kind of counting the, you know, your eggs for the season, and you can start to go, okay, that's us done another year. Truth is, you've still got a lot of packing up to do,
Yeah.
but that's all it is. So yeah, that's basically a typical season.
So cool. I mean, I get knots in my stomach hearing about that, to be honest with you. It sounds like it can be kind of daunting. And I mean, you're pretty much, you're doing this labor of love full time. I mean, you miss family, and be hard to have a dog. So you give up a lot to do this very, very cool thing. So I can imagine it is very tough. Um, but yeah, I mean, you think it's rewarding and it's worth it. I mean, what keeps you? Do you have like a thing that keeps you going every day? Something inside that you're like, you know, you feel it, like this is what you're meant to be doing, at least at this moment in time.
Yeah, there's three things keep me motivated. One of which is obviously should be very obvious to everyone is sake is just, you know, it's not for everyone. I get that, but to me personally, and to a lot of people that I'm, you know, surrounded by, it's just a fascinating thing. There seems to be no definitives in it. I mean, it's a lifetime of learning. One of the
Right.
things I
Yeah.
hate
Yeah.
most is when people identify themselves as sake experts. I meet a lot of extremely experienced people, and the one thing they all have in common is they never say they're experts. It's almost the way you can identify when someone isn't an expert is when
Oh
they say
yeah.
they are, because you really, the more you know about it, the more you realize you don't understand this thing.
Totally. Right. Yeah.
So that motivation to, you know, the fact that I honestly don't think in my lifetime I'm ever going to get to a point where I say, that's it. I
Mm.
figured this all out. I know exactly what I'm doing. I get it. I can just stop now. I honestly don't think that'll ever happen. It's just so complicated, and you can go down so many different rabbit holes with it. So yeah, that's the obvious one. In terms of actual in work, there's something. It's a very, very brief moment But when we press a batch of sake, there's a kind of ritual, and I noticed they did it vigorously at my first brewery, but I noticed that they didn't at my new brewery. So I kind of reinstated it, and actually they seem to kind of get into it now. At some breweries, you're going to get a very, very strict pecking order. And I learned a valuable lesson in my second season where um, when they press a batch of sake, they quickly go and get one of these large kiki chocolate, it's called. It's about 180 mil ceramic vessel, and they fill it up with sake, and it's just pressed. You cannot get any fresher. But there's a bit of a ritual with that. What you're supposed to do with that, it doesn't matter who takes the sake, takes it from the tank, but you absolutely should give that to the toji, the person who made it, and they should try it first. And then it should go to the next person. Typically, that person would be a kashira. That means the head of the brewery. And these are very influential people. And then it would go to the next in line, and so on and so on. And I made a very big mistake at my first brewery, where I gave it to the toji and there was no one else around. And he handed it back to me. And just as I was drinking it, the kashira walked in and saw this. And it's safe to say he didn't speak to me genuinely. He didn't speak to me for about 2 weeks after that. That's how, seriously they take it. But when I came to Fukucho, they didn't do this. And I actually kind of really got into it. So I take a cup every single time now because I'm on the shibori team, the pressing team. And I go and fill that cup, and I go and find Imada-san and I give her that cup. And she gives us her verdict on the sake that she's made, and then I go to the next person, and then I'm usually third in line anyway. So I take a drink, and that moment is fantastic. It only lasts about 20 minutes, but there's a real sense of accomplishment, that you've done something. There's a tangible part of the brewing season that's just been completed, and of course within minutes afterwards you're back doing something else and you kind of forget about it. But that is a nice moment as a sake brewer. But the last, at least, is job satisfaction. When I worked at BMW, I joined at the same time as this man called Keith Duncan. Great man. He was extremely supportive of throughout my career. But he was at a lower level than he finished off, and so was I. And we kind of went up through the ranks together, and to the point where he's now a director of the company. And he was always highly motivated, always optimistic. Always, it was his job to gear up the staff. And the last time I got to go back to the UK, I obviously haven't been back in a while because of for obvious reasons. I went back to my old company, and I saw him, and we kind of caught up with each other. And I said, "So how's work? How's things? Are you still enjoying yourself?" And he said, "Well, he said, the more I do this job, I've come to the realize that it's the realization that it's futile what we do." And I said, "Well, that really kind of surprised me." I thought, I felt that there was something unsatisfying about the job, which is why I left, but I could never work out what it was. And he said, "Well, he said, it's funny what we do. We bend over backwards for customers. We work hard every day. We get paid well. But at the end of the day, if this company was gone tomorrow, no one would care." And I sort of thought about that. And as I was thinking, he said, "It's true. If this company was gone tomorrow, what people would do that didn't realize is they would pull up to our car park and they would say, oh, that place is closed now." And they would just pick up their phone and Google next available BMW dealership. Oh, there's one 5 miles away. And they would go to that dealership. It would be a minor inconvenience, but no one would care. At Fukucho, I genuinely believe, and my last brewery as well, if that company, for whatever reason, was gone tomorrow, people would care. People would genuinely care. It would have an impact locally. It would have an impact, the people that are kind enough to sell our sake. It would have an impact overseas, the people that are kind enough to promote our sake. All these people that have been working for years to build up the brand. People would it would affect people. It wouldn't be the end of the world. I'm not saying that, But people would say, I miss that sake. And that is the difference between the job I'm in now and the job I was doing before. It kind of means something to a lot of people. So that motivates you to, I suppose, to do a good job, to not let the company down. And it kind of hopefully motivates everyone to, we're all in the right direction, that every year, try and make as little mistakes as possible and try and work as hard as we can to make a good product, because people are counting, or people are expecting us to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The industry is pretty, I wouldn't say necessarily precarious is the right word for it, but certainly it's facing a lot of challenges, which we'll kind of get into. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very well said. It's true. People would miss the brewery. I mean, locally, regionally, and maybe even people who haven't tried it before. Um, I haven't had Karuizawa whiskey, but I still am like, okay, the distillery is shuttered, and what a disappointment. And there's all these amazing, malt distilleries in Scotland, for example, that's like, wouldn't it be great, or in Ireland too, where this industry had this massive retraction, a lot of craft distilleries, and it's a different product, obviously. And I don't think would be as challenging maybe to make, but certainly there's some parallels with, this craft, and something that people cared quite a bit about, that really drove local economies, and people all over the world would thirst for these things. And then when they're gone, you can still kind of feel the void of it, where you've got fewer and fewer companies producing more and more of the same, and so you definitely lose something when any of these, any brewery closes, which is kind of a sad fact of the industry, unfortunately. At least I don't
Yeah,
know how long
absolutely.
it goes back, but certainly if anybody listening doesn't know that, sake breweries, the sake industry has lost many breweries, and it'll probably continue to happen. Though, maybe some of the statistics I've seen lately, it's leveling off a little bit. There's a lot of demand on the export market, and maybe a resurgence in sake, so domestically too. So, and we'll get into that. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I guess one last thing, to kind of the life of a sake brewer is, it's pretty unique that you're a Westerner brewing at a super traditional brewery in Japan. So, I mean, do you have any, after all displaying this whole kind of horror story, the way I hear it, making this beautiful product, I mean, any advice for anyone that wants to get into sake brewing?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I haven't painted it as a horror story. I always try and be
Yeah,
realistic
I
with
mean, I
people.
see it
And
that way. I'm like, I hear this, I'm like, oh, that sounds so hard,
yeah, no,
but yeah, it is kind of romantic too at the same time.
yeah, no, I would recommend it to anyone that's willing to make these sacrifices, because it to me it's a fantastic job. I'm so glad that I did it. Do I think it's for everyone? No. I sort of know people, and I think that person would just, it just is not for them. I know their lifestyle. Um, but yeah, I do think it's a fantastic job if you're sensible with yourself, if you're honest with yourself. Can I really make these kind of commitments to say goodbye to friends and family for half a year every year, and really kind of work my work yourself to the bone, if that's what you do every year. Am I willing to do that for the rewards that I hopefully have made obvious, that it is a very, very satisfying job? Again, you have to be realistic about money. You have to be realistic about, you can't just go in and, I mean, I went in with very little Japanese skill, if I'm being honest. But I knew that it was something I would have to do if I was to continue. Anyone can go in for a year and sort of, get by. But you get to the second year, you're kind of just being a nuisance to other people if you don't start trying to communicate with them. So if you're committed to not just brewing, but learning the language, probably making a few exceptions on your own cultural preferences as well, to kind of blend in, then yeah, I say go for it. It's it's a fantastic experience. I've met so many cool people. The brewing community is a very fun community. People are very, very friendly, or not everyone, but most people are very, very friendly. They're very, very supportive as well. A lot of people get surprised at how uncompetitive it is. It's normally people offering to help you or give you advice. So yeah, if you think that that you can put yourself through all the negatives, there's a whole host of positives to have from choosing that career as well. So my advice is to go for it if you think you can. If you think you can deal with that, then yes, definitely do it.
And I mean, I guess kind of transitioning into the industry and where we're at today. I mean, do you think that more and more breweries would be receptive to foreigners or to Westerners, who are committed, who are passionate to joining their breweries?
Absolutely,
Are there
yeah.
opportunities for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's being honest. My first brewery was a culture shock for the staff more than it was for me, because I was the first. They told me that, I think 3 of them told me they were the first foreigner they'd ever met, and I couldn't
Really?
believe this. I mean, and thinking this is not 30, 40 years ago, but this is a small town. Many of them hadn't traveled extensively, so and when they say met, they probably meant speak to. I'm sure they've seen another foreigner. You always hear this, haven't seen another foreigner. I find that part hard to believe. But to have met and spoke to them, this was the first time.
Wow.
So there is that kind of culture thing that you have to get used to, and that can be challenging to say the least. But that gets washed away with once you start communicating better. And as I said, the onus is definitely on you, to whether or not you're a success or not have you might get some bad examples, but if you put in the work and you show them that you're learning Japanese, you're willing to work, you're willing to maybe sort of bite your lip a few times when things that you think usually cultural differences, and you think you've been aggrieved. If you do all that, I think people will be susceptible to it. It's sometimes a little hard to get in the front door, but get your foot in the door. But once you're there, once you've got that foot in the door, it's really up to you to prove to them that you're capable of leading this lifestyle. And I think that manpower is a big issue for sake breweries, and going forward, they're having foreigners that can not only brew for them in the winter, but possibly support them in exporting in the summer when they're quiet. I think it's a real big advantage to a lot of breweries. Not all of them. Some of them maybe aren't interested in exporting. That's fine. But to have that, to fill a gap that they maybe can't fill with local people anymore, and to have someone that can communicate with a broader market, there's definitely a role for foreigners.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've had some bad experiences as a foreigner because I'm a foreigner. I won't go into what they are, but in general, for the most part, people have been very, very kind to me in this industry. So I wouldn't be worried about discrimination or something like that. The truth is you're going to hear discriminatory things. It's just a fact. Some people will say things that you get annoyed about because you're foreign, but in general, most people have been extremely kind to me. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, something that I'd always thought about. There are some opportunities, and maybe I'll put that in the description or into the blog post that'll come out of this as well. But there are a few brewers that do sort of like the host you and kind of show you a little bit, about the sake brewing process, maybe give you a little foot in the door too. So, I'll maybe share some links to that to anybody that's interested as well. So, all right, this has been pretty cool. Let's move on a little bit. I mean, so we're kind of touching on this subject now, the sake industry as a whole. It's got to have a lot of turmoil